Hello, I'm Dodee Crockett. Managing Director and Wealth Management Advisor for Merrill Lynch. As a partner of Social Venture Partners Dallas and a board member of PRX, it's an honor to bring this conversation to the Big Bang today. Enjoy.
Hi, I'm Krys Boyd, host of the Think Show heard on KERA, and I am so happy to be here as part of the Social Impact Conference Big Bang, which is taking place until Friday, October 29th. Joining me today are Nigel and Earlonne Woods. They are the co-creators and co-hosts of Ear Hustle. That's the first podcast created and produced in prison. It features stories of daily life inside California's San Quentin State Prison. Some of those stories have now been collected into a book. It's called This is Ear Hustle, Unflinching Stories of Everyday Prison Life. Earlonne and Nigel, thank you for joining me today.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
When you meet somebody who has never listened to the Ear Hustle podcast, what do you tell them to expect?
Well, I always say it will not be anything that you assume about prison. You're going to have a completely different view because we really concentrate on the everyday stories of prison, not the hype, not the violence, not the wrongfully convicted, kind of the small details that make life interesting.
Yeah.
Do you have the same description, Earlonne?
No, it's pretty much somewhat, and I just always tell them, you're listening to stories from individuals' perspectives, from their words. Let them tell their own stories. So that's what I usually tell people.
Yeah, yep.
There are always challenges to making something that is compelling and creative and true, but working in a prison, even a prison that happens to have a media lab, has meant that you all deal with physical conditions that are really tough. What are some of the things you've had to work around that are like the worst nightmare of every other podcast producer?
Well,
Lockdowns,
exactly. For anyone, getting a project done requires a schedule and deadlines, and we try to meet all of our deadlines, but there's times when the prison is shut down where the wall just goes up and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. And it happened when you were still inside.
Yeah, I think it was our Boom Boom episode.
Yeah, 3 weeks, right?
Yeah, and it went down based on some type of lockdown where we was almost finished with the episode, like the credits or something, and we couldn't get it done based on the lockdown. We had to wait.
Yeah, so there's big things like that. And then there's things like, there's no internet. It's sometimes even difficult to get something printed. So everything takes time, and you just have to remember that what you could do outside in 60 seconds can take 2 hours inside the prison.
And then at the same time, you have Lieutenant Sam Robinson that has to hear the episodes and make sure it's not, injurious to anyone inside or,
Yeah.
We should talk about that. You both thank him at the end of the book. He was the sort of media liaison for San Quentin. I guess he could have been really an impediment to getting episodes produced. What was that relationship like?
Amazing. Lieutenant Robinson's a really special person. So as you said, he's the public information officer. He deals with all the media coming into the prison and coming out. And both Earlonne and I spent a long time getting to know him, earning his trust. And people always ask if he censors us. No, he doesn't. His job is to listen for anything that's going to be dangerous to the institution. But he's a huge supporter. And I always say this about him. I know he's a good guy because the guys who are incarcerated at San Quentin trust him and the administration trusts him. So he's a real straight shooter. Do you think so?
No. I think he's the type of individual that you need in those type of positions, because he's open. He's not just like, oh, it's just us against them. He's like, no, this is one community. So, I definitely like Lieutenant Robinson.
We couldn't have done the podcast without him.
He the one that gave us the green light.
It actually comes up in the podcast that in terms of relationships with corrections officers, it can be risky for inmates to actually get along really well with those folks. Earlonne, can you talk a little bit about that?
I wouldn't, I would say it more like there's always going to be some type of wall between incarcerated individuals and the staff. Because if you're seen talking to a correctional officer too much, then you're going to have this what is that word? Overfamiliarity element involved, you know, and it might be looked upon or frowned upon by the incarcerated individuals, like, what you over there telling that dude? Yeah. Or you're a woman, you know what I'm saying? And then from the probably the CO's point of view, they're gonna be like, so what you over there fraternizing about? What's going on? Y'all doing something? What's happening? So you have that. But outside, I think like San Quentin was one of them spots where individuals do have frank conversations with individuals, you know, do daps and shake hands, you know, because I think individuals are beyond.
Do you think it's different at other prisons?
Oh, it's totally different. Yeah. It's you probably would never give a dap to an officer in other prisons.
So I want to talk a little bit about you both. Earlonne, before you got into any real trouble, you were like the class clown. So I'm interested because now you're also a personality in addition to being a producer on this podcast. So how do you think, were there signs of the work that you're able to do today present when you were just a little kid?
Probably, maybe the storytelling. We used to like to do storytelling, and I was just telling a friend of mine, Ellen, I was like, I was a class clown because I was hiding that I couldn't read. You know what I'm saying? I was hiding other probably insecurities, so, you know, you act out in those ways. But I think that was one of the bases of why I was a class clown.
But you also were finding a workaround. You know what I mean?
I was working around not letting everybody know where I was at education-wise, you know?
I think people who don't have any experience with gangs have a hard time sometimes understanding why anybody would get themselves down that road. And you describe, Earlonne, that these guys in your neighborhood that you started running with were like a fraternity, like a family. They were not people that you thought about doing crime with. They were thought about people you thought of as your friends. Correct.
I mean, yeah, it's you know, you grow up and you have a cool little family of friends, you know, and next thing you know, y'all went from climbing trees, jumping roofs, getting, you know, into this, and now you're getting into trouble, you know, and it's not for all your friends, but it's just a certain segment of your friends that y'all just tend to go to the extremes, whether it's showing out for one another, daring one another, you know, and then you just get sidetracked by the gangs, you know.
And it didn't occur to you that it could get really serious, I guess, when you were a kid.
Not at all. You know, you don't look at it like that. You just look at it like, oh, these are the homies. You know, we doing this and we doing that. And then I think as time go on, you start looking at it differently because now it's into the colors, or now it's in the, we're from this neighborhood, you're from that neighborhood, and you wearing this color, so we finna come beat you up just because you wearing this color, or vice versa. We finna get beat up because we're wearing this color. So you don't look at it like that when you're a kid until you're really in it. And then when you in it, you're like, damn, I'm in some other type of shit.
Nigel, I want to talk about your background. You're a visual artist. You say you now spend more time at San Quentin than doing anything else, including sleeping. Yeah. And that relationship started with a misdelivered letter?
Yes. So I'd been thinking about prisons, interested in prison life. And then I got a letter delivered to my house from San Quentin, not to me, to an address that wasn't even close to my address. And it got me thinking more about prisons, and I would take the letter and I would deliver it to the right house. I never saw who it was going to, but it happened 3 times, which was just plain weird. And so I felt like I was getting this call from somewhere to figure out how to get into San Quentin. Yeah.
So what surprised you when you started teaching there?
Well, I didn't expect, I'd been educated in prison by bad TV and movies and shoddy journalism, so I expected to find angry men, uneducated, probably not happy to be in the classroom. I had all the stereotypes of what people expect prison to be like, and very quickly, from my very first day in there, all of those assumptions were completely challenged, and I was absolutely intrigued and wanted to spend more time in there and understand the prison better, and just understand and be there.
I don't know if it's even possible for you both now to remember the time before you knew each other well, but I'm curious about what your first impressions were.
No, I remember clearly, I just, because San Quentin, one of them prisons where you have a lot of volunteers go through, and she used to come down to the media center a lot, and one thing I could say about her was she was a one note-taking woman. She used to take notes about everything, and then she later told me she'd take a lot of notes because sometimes she just don't remember everything. And I was like, okay.
Yeah. No, I remember when I first met Earlonne, he was really quiet. He was the type of person who just kind of went to the back of a crowd, but I noticed he was always paying attention and that he was super thoughtful. And I'm always interested in the person in the room who's not saying, look at me, look at me. And Earlonne was one of those guys. So over maybe about over 2 years, we slowly got to know each other. But I noticed him because he was present and like a very solid person.
You write that you realized, oh, this guy thinks like an artist. What does that mean to you?
Well, to me, artists are problem solvers. They look at a situation and they try to figure it out in a way that other people haven't thought of before. And they try to bring truths and ideas to the surface. And in prison, in many ways, prison is a life of deprivation. And so Earlonne and other guys are always trying to find a workaround, always trying to find a creative solution. And to me, that's what artists do. They look for creative solutions. And Earlonne definitely thinks like that.
Well, thank you.
Earlonne, did you start thinking about yourself that way as an artist, as a creator, as soon as you were really involved in the podcast?
I think I probably thought of it as, let's get this done, let's figure it out. In retrospect, if I look at it like, am I an artist? I guess I might be.
You know what? I know there was a change, and I don't know what the date was, but I remember when you started referring to your cell as your studio. Like you going back to my studio work, and then I was like, yeah, he's an artist. He's got a studio. I wish I remembered exactly when it was, but yeah.
I mean, because, sometimes I used to every now and again draw. And that's what I used to, in my mind, was like artist. But then, you have, doing music, doing podcasts, doing storytelling. It's all art.
So you started talking about doing this podcast together. And I think it's so interesting that when I asked you at the top how you describe it to people, both of you described what it definitely wasn't. And I wonder about the process of talking about what you didn't want it to sound like, to look like, to feel like. And then there's one thing, you say what you don't want it to be, but you still have to decide what you do want it to be. So talk me through that.
Okay, that's so interesting. I never noted that that's how we talk about it, but you're so right. Can I say what we wanted? I think it's the same thing. We really wanted to tell sensitive, thoughtful stories about individuals' experiences, how they make a life where they are. And it still bothers me when people say, oh, in prison, people's lives are on hold, because that's not how I saw it. I saw people living interesting, complicated, and sometimes difficult lives in prison, and I wanted to express that. So I wanted to tell stories about how people make a life in prison, and we were absolutely 100% that they were going to be stories told from the perspective of those who are living it. We also knew that we wanted Earlonne and myself to be the narrators. We wanted to be the people escorting you through the stories, me as the voice of someone from the outside, Earlonne as the voice from the inside. So we would be, over time, we would be the constant. We would always be there to, as I say, escort people. We knew we wanted music to be a part of it. We knew we wanted the sounds of San Quentin to be another character. So we had a very clear vision of what we wanted, even though, as you said, we always start by talking about what it's not going to be. And because, as Earlonne said, I'm a note taker, we know exactly on October 5th, 2015, Earlonne and I sat down in the Media Lab and we wrote out our plan. And those were all the things we wrote about. And we have that document to this day.
And I think that one of the biggest things that Nigel wanted to do was show that incarcerated individuals and someone in the free world could work together as colleagues. So that was like one of the main missions.
Yes, and that nothing bad would happen. Like we could be professional colleagues. And honestly, if there were more programs like that in prisons across the country where outside and inside people work together as colleagues, I think it would make a huge difference for everybody, for people who are incarcerated and people who aren't.
And it's getting there.
It's getting there. It's changing. It's really important.
So Earlonne, you're out now and it's your full-time job to be producing this podcast, and now you've written a book. I'm really curious though about your perspective interviewing people when you were still on the inside, because on the one hand, you knew a lot about prison life at this time. You had been locked up for a long time, but you approach your interviews with such a curiosity, like you are open to learning and you don't assume you already know what people are going to answer you. And as someone who's been interviewing people for a long time, not everybody sort of comes to it from that spirit. And I wonder how you decided the way you wanted to approach interviewing.
I think, to this day, I still work on that. I think in that time, in that moment, being that I had so much time in prison, you can pretty much cut through when someone is not being open, not being honest, not, getting you what you want, and then I may hit them with certain questions. And I used to learn a lot from Nigel, which I still do, because Nigel would get to the minutia. Nigel would get to all the little, what it smell like, what it tastes like, and I pick up that stuff. So some of the stuff that she used to hit people with, I used to hit them probably, I want to say, with the opposite, or with what was, from I don't want to say a prison standpoint, but from a person in my position that had my life experience standpoint. Yeah, if that makes sense.
In our interviews, we really work as a team, and we're very intuitive with each other. I mean, I'm not going to say we know what questions they're going to ask, but actually sometimes we do. We actually do sometimes know what the other is going to ask. And so we bring our strengths and our weaknesses to every interview, and we support each other through every interview. I hate doing interviews with Earlonne. It happens occasionally, and sometimes he has to do one without me, but I think our best interviews are when they're done together.
She just said she hates doing interviews with Earlonne.
I did? Dang it. No, I hate doing it without Earlonne. Did I really say that? That was not a Freudian slip. That's the joy.
Well, let me ask you this. You talked to one guy, and this appears in the book, who made the choice to get sober in prison. And I have to say that surprised me, because I wouldn't have assumed necessarily this is a thing that you get to choose, that it would be so hard to get drugs that you're sort of forced to go through some kind of detox. Can you talk about this guy and his motivation?
Our friend Shane. Shane that's one of the coolest, funniest dudes that, you can probably run across, and he used to just we used to have so much tape of this dude, man, how we should use all this stuff. Yeah, but I think for an individual like Shane, and to this day, he's clean, sober, job, wife, everything. And it's a big decision when you're in prison to do something different than what's being done. And for a person that's in that, let's say, for instance, drug world or addict world, the hardest move to make probably is sobering up, because most of your peers that you're dealing with is probably doing drugs or whatever the case may be. So I definitely, hats off to Shane. And
not easy. Yeah, I mean, I think what it also points to is that there are a lot of people that get to prison, and when they get there, they realize, I've gotten to the end of my rope here, and I better make a change. And they find this strength within themselves to confront their behavior and make changes, and that's really inspiring, because it is not easy. And Shane's a really good example of that.
And I think Shane said the one time when I think it was his wife that came, and it was his fiance at the time, and she was like, "Bruh, you look worse than you did on the street."
Yeah,
and that's what hit him.
Yeah, he really heard it.
Is there such a thing as making the best use of the time that somebody is locked up? I imagine maybe that's different for every individual.
Of course. I mean, I've got stuff to say, but
I think you have to, so I think people change themselves when they come up with the thought that, or the light switch in their head come on, I gotta do something different. Or a lot of individuals that have great support from the outside, or family members that's really in their lives, hey man, is there anything I can help you doing? Some dudes go to college, some dudes take groups. So you'll find yourself, going through this maturation just in life general, and I think especially the longer that you're incarcerated, you work on yourself. And I think I think it just happens.
Oh, man. That was one of the things that really drew me to San Quentin. And San Quentin is a little bit different than other prisons because they have so many volunteers that go in and out of the prison and so many programs. So I think a lot of people imagine when you're in prison, you're just sitting there all day doing nothing. But a lot of guys at San Quentin are, they're working, they're taking classes, they're studying all kinds of stuff. And so there's a lot of change that's made. And at prisons where there aren't as many programs, still, people are doing a lot of reading, they're making groups on their own. So prison is not a stagnant place. Again, it's not a place where people's lives are on hold. Of course, there's people who are just
jailing.
Yeah, as you would say,
You're gonna
just
have
jailing,
not looking to do anything. And the thing about that is, sometimes, what the problem or the root problem to a lot of this stuff is mental health, and prison can be a place that you can take the time and really look inside yourself, or you could just do time.
Yeah, I mean, I share this carefully because I don't want prison to sound, I don't want it to make it sound like I'm saying prison is a great place to be, because obviously there's a lot of horrible things about it. But I've met quite a few guys that said prison was the best thing that ever happened to them because it gave them an opportunity to really change. I don't think they wanted to be there, but it was really good for them. And a lot of guys have said it saved their lives. That does not discount how terrible prison is. But I think we should acknowledge that people make momentous changes when they're inside.
Earlonne, how do you feel about the time you spent in prison?
Too long. For the crime that was committed, I was sentenced under a mandatory minimum, of 25 years to life,
Excuse me for interrupting. This was attempted robbery, is that right?
Attempted second-degree robbery, okay, where my actual sentence probably would have been 3 years. But based on when I was a juvenile, I had committed a crime that had 2 felonies in it. So when I went to jail for the first time as an adult, I was sentenced to 31 years to life plus 26 years to life. So, of course, I felt bitter for a long time, and I think I tried I think one of my motivations and one of my, what pushed me through was always thinking outside the box, from
like
being
an artist.
Yeah, from being in prison, trying to get an initiative on the ballot, to creating organizations in prison and just trying to get individuals, whether it was in the hip hop industry, whether it was in whatever industry, like get involved in this, because there's laws out here that I'll say this, 3 strikes, you look around the prison and you see everybody in there under the 3 strikes are black and brown. So you're trying to convey that to people like, listen, this is not a just law. This law is targeting certain individuals. So I think my whole time in prison was more of how do I get out of prison and not do all this time? Because at this particular point right now, today, I don't supposed to be out of prison until November of 2028.
You'll go up for parole.
Well, hold on one second. But me being freed from prison was until 2028, and that was just me going in front of a parole board and seeing if they would let me out. So that's not saying that I would have actually got out had the governor not stepped in and commuted my sentence. So I think, to answer your question, it was just me really trying to figure out how was I going to not only think outside the box, but get outside that box.
One thing that seems to happen in prison that is described over and over in the podcast is this dividing up by race. What do you think it is about prison that creates this culture where it becomes really important that you use race to sort of figure out who you can trust and who you need to be careful of?
If I can understand your question correctly, so in California, I can't speak on any other state because I've never done time in that, but in California, the prisons were segregated as just like society. And as society moved out of segregation, the prisons never did. They still house people by race. So I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I've heard men talk about it. That it's, I don't want to say a tradition, but I think it's a holdover from other times, and that people feel safer. if there's something gets kicked off in there, some violence, you need to be with your race to defend your race. I'm putting this all in quotes because it's obviously not something I agree with, but you notice it. I mean, when you walk into San Quentin, it's very clear to me where the white area is, where the black area is, where the other area is. But it's interesting, the media lab where we work and where we worked when Earlonne was there was very mixed.
No, definitely. And so individuals will mix it up, whether it's in your trades, whether it's in, like, when we was at the media center. But I think individuals have been, living with this belief that, it'll be less drama if individuals stick to their own race. Like, you may have a situation where you're on the basketball court, and if you're playing a different race and you foul this person too hard, and y'all get to fight, and everybody's fighting. You know what I'm saying? So I think whomever put these in place years ago, a lot of it was probably done by the officers inside, of doing that. So I think it could be peaceful. It could not be peaceful. You know what I'm saying? I don't know.
Yeah, but people talk about it as if it keeps the peace somehow. I don't know. I don't have a great answer for you. I can just tell you what I've observed in there.
For people who are just hearing this interview and not watching it, Nigel, you're a white woman. Earlonne, you're a black man. I wonder if race ever played into how you communicate with each other.
It's funny because I've been having these certain conversations, not to this extent, but certain conversations with friends of mine, and we always talk about race. And, I always, say that I don't really look at a person for their skin color. I look at a person where their loyalties and their heart lies. You know what I'm saying? And that's how I judge people on their actions and how they present themselves, and represent themselves. So I don't think it has ever been an issue that she's a white woman and I'm a black guy. I think we're a representation of the United States of America.
But honestly, it's never been an issue for us.
No.
Maybe it's been an issue for other people, but I'm going to say it has never been an issue for us. We've never even really talked about it.
I remember, some people used to always say that, remember this long time, how can a white woman do this, do that? And I used to say, everybody in prison is not black. Like, it's you have white people in prison.
Yes.
It used to always crack me up.
Yeah. But it's something, honestly, that we haven't discussed in depth. There were times when people said, like, a white lady shouldn't be doing this work. And that kind of perplexed me, too, because we're working together as colleagues. We couldn't do this without each other. So the different worlds we come from, our different personalities just gelled, and it didn't matter what our races were.
And it works.
It does work. Earlonne, you have interviewed people who have, like, swastika tattoos and really kind of offensive white supremacist tattoos. Some of them, talk about regretting those decisions. I don't know if everybody does. How do you set aside that symbol that might be hurtful or frightening or offensive to you and just try to get to know the person?
I'm not racist. I walk into it as equals, even in prison, even though things are segregated by race, individuals have great conversations. Individuals have great times together just hanging out. We can't play on the yard together or hang out in each other's areas, but outside of all that, there are conversations. So if I'm sitting here talking to an individual, I know personally that whatever he's representing or whatever he's caught up in or anybody, it doesn't, have anything technically to do with me as a person. Is sometimes it's just gang shit.
Yeah. Gang stuff.
Sometimes it's just gang stuff.
Thank you.
The very first time I saw someone with a swastika on their chest, it was very unnerving to me. It was somebody that I knew pretty well, I really liked, and he bent forward and I could see on his chest a big swastika. It hurt. And I really had to think about this guy. And then I realized, people get tattoos for all kinds of reasons. I didn't know when he got it. He could have had it for decades. And so I just had to think about him as the person he was in front of me and the kinds of conversations we had. So and sometimes the tattoo does not exactly express who that person is. And there's reasons, as Earlonne was saying, that people get certain tattoos in prison. I mean, I've talked to guys who have a swastika tattoo, and they said they didn't even understand what they were getting at the time. Like, they knew it was a symbol of this gang, but they didn't really understand all the weight behind it. So I think about those things too when I see stuff like that.
I was really fascinated by this interview you feature with a guy named Joseph, who is on the autism spectrum.
Yes.
How did that shape the way he coped emotionally with being behind bars?
It's a trip because you see individuals like Joseph. Again, like I say, whether it's autism, whether it's mental health, whatever it is, you see all types of individuals. And, for cats like that, you just have to, I would say applaud them as they work their way through prison, because sometimes prison can be harsh. You have individuals in there that take advantage of people. It's not a cakewalk in certain places. So, individuals like him, being shut out, and then, when you're a specific race, you're expected to roll a certain way. So, I always took my hat off to individuals that did their own thing, and I think Joseph was one of them dudes.
Yeah, and he found his own workaround. He found people that were like him in prison. He was really into Dungeons and Dragons and other kinds of mythical games.
Which is illegal in prison.
Yeah.
You said why?
Listen, it's the craziest shit because you don't. Excuse me, the listener alert was made for me on Ear Hustle. So,
Okay.
But Dungeons and Dragons is one of those games that bring all races together, and it should be supported. But I think when it get to gaming,
they think it's gambling.
No, I think it's gaming. It's some type of something, card gaming. It's something that they said, this you can't do this. But it's clearly the one thing where you will have a section of the yard that's all races. So
They're just all nerds.
All nerds. L7s.
L7s.
Squares.
There are nerds literally everywhere.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I never could play Dungeons and Dragons. My mother wouldn't allow it. She was a devoted Christian, and I used to always tell her that you might have went wrong with that one, Mama. I could have been a nerd.
What happens when you are in prison and you need to cry?
You have to find a space for that. You have to, usually it probably would be in your cell, and you might not even cry with tears. You know what I'm saying? You just your soul might be crying, and, me, I'll engulf myself with music, and try to, console myself in whatever capacity that is. But I think if you need to cry, you need to cry because you're going to have a support system. There's, guys in prison that's going to support you. They're going to stand there and hold that space with you, So I would just say, let it out.
Yeah, it seems like you got to find the right group.
You definitely got to find, but you're not just going to be in the middle of the yard crying.
No.
You got some bravado to uphold.
There was a really interesting series of interviews with women who have relationships with men who are inside. And it made me think a lot about the ways that when you put one person away, you affect an entire community. And I wonder if you can talk about the decision to include this in Ear Hustle.
Yeah.
Of course, we always like to, incorporate women into the stories. I'm trying to think, what story did we do?
Well, we did the one about the visiting. I can't remember the name of the story, but really, we wanted to talk about how incarceration has a ripple effect, and it affects children, it affects partners of the people who are incarcerated. And when Earlonne was inside, we really could only do stories inside San Quentin, and there are not women in there, and there aren't children. So, and I didn't want to do interviews without him out here. So when he got out, we were able to start incorporating different voices, and that's when we could really start to explore how is prison affecting women and children. It's a super important topic.
Yeah, and it does affect the community because you're taking, yes, individuals may have something wrong in their life, whatever it is, whether if they're addicted to crime, committing crime, on drugs, but, individuals taken out, and in some cases, you're taken out for I'm going to say centuries. I'm going to say decades, and it's a lot of individuals taken out of those communities and out of those families and for decades. So it definitely has a way to adversely affect the family and community, and, just a phone call and letters, it somewhat works, but, like one of the things I'm very passionate about, ending California 3 strikes law. You have a gang of people that's in prison that's just sitting there, languishing around, and they're ready to come home, been ready to come home. It's over. Matter of fact, it's a lot. I was going to go down a whole nother road, but I won't do it.
Something, I'll just betray my own biases here. Something that's always bothered me is that in our society, we call people who go to prison, have been to prison, we call them criminals, like it's a permanent status that sort of marks somebody. And I'm curious about the thought you've both given to the ability to move past that, maybe not even in your own head, but in the minds of other people who might make assumptions about you.
I think for me, it is easier because, we've won awards. We've created a major show of me talking about my past being open. So people might look at it like, oh, yeah. But for some individuals, just that one bad decision becomes who you're labeled as, like you just said, and it's hella sad, but that's how this society is built. To where, if you're a felon, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't have this job, you can't have that job, you got to do a background check. So it's more like, we want you to be out, we want you to live a productive life, but we're going to do this background check. But it's almost like, it's like, I can tell you this, I had talked to this one guy, and I don't know why I can't remember his name. This is just this train. All right. It's one guy, and I want to say he was from Checkered. I think it's a background checking place. And he had told me and Adnan one day, he said he had to change. He owned this background company, and what he started realizing was that there was a segment of people which were formerly incarcerated that were being flagged. So his whole thing was like, if you can't get a job and move on from your past, then how will you become a productive individual out here? It seems like if you can't get jobs, you're going to recidivate because you need to make money. You need to, support your family, support your life, or just start your own business, and which is a lot. So I don't know why it's in society, an individual gets labeled to where that label follows you forever. I don't know.
It's really hard. Well, I would go back to the point I made earlier about having more programs where outside and inside people work together, and it creates a sense of normalcy, that people in prison are not that different from you. I think it would make a huge difference. And I'm always very confused by when people get out of prison and there's things they still can't do. Like, for example, Earlonne can't go to Canada, right?
Can't go to Canada, can't go to Japan.
Can't go to Japan. He did his time. He paid his time or whatever. He did his time, and yet there's still punishments. He can't get pre-TSA. So when we travel together, I get to go through the pre-TSA line, and he can't. It's like, well, why is there still a punishment once you get out of prison? Like, when do you ever completely get away from that stigma?
And PTSA, I couldn't understand that because I'm telling you who I am. Yeah. This is who I am. This is everything I've done in my life. And you got it on record, but then they's like, nah, get at the end of the line.
Yeah. And I mean, Earlonne's in a great position because he had a job when he got out of prison. He had a community waiting for him. There's thousands and thousands of people who don't have that. And for them, re-entering is really difficult. After the euphoria wears off about being out, the reality is really tough.
But it's definitely sad to always be labeled as formerly incarcerated, ex-convict, criminal. It's, you can never move. No matter, probably if I was a billionaire, it might be different, Yeah,
it's always different for those billionaires.
When did you both start thinking about the possibility that Earlonne could have his sentence commuted?
So I submitted an application for commutation when Governor Jerry Brown was in, and I think when I received the interview, which is one of the biggest parts of that, when they come and say, well, we're going to interview you for this, and then I had to interview, and then when it went to the M-Bank, and the M-Bank, they approved it, which is basically the California Parole Board approving it. And being that I had a previous case, it had to go to the Supreme Court and so on. So once I think the prison parole hearing approved it, it was like, okay, this is happening. This is happening, because once it got to the Supreme Court, it took some time. And then when the Supreme Court came back and was like, we approve this, we don't disagree, then it was on the governor.
But the whole process was about a year long.
About a year.
So I don't remember when we started talking about it before, but from the beginning to the end was a year. That's a long time to wait to not know. And there were so many steps. I mean, I think one thing you learn in prison is to temper your expectations, right? I mean, I wasn't willing to get really excited about it until it was a done deal. And there were so many places along the way where that deal could have been undone, and disappointment would be really hard to take in.
So I always be like, good looking out, Governor Brown.
Yes.
Earlonne, one of the pieces of advice you got when you undertook this was you had to start smiling in your ID photos. Is that right?
Yes.
Who said that to you?
That was Chin. I think it was Chin.
Yeah,
he was
funny.
the guy that came and interviewed me for the commutation, because they ask you a series of questions to see, are you ready? Do you understand what it is, your causative factors, when did that light switch go off, and talk about your education. And he just told me straight up, he said, man, if I just went off your picture, because, usually when you take these pictures, you've been on a long bus ride, you done got to this new prison, you're tired, and so you get in there and you just take the picture. You just probably be mean mugging, like, so he was like, if I take this, you look standoffish. So I would just say smile on your pictures, you know what I'm saying? And I'm like, next day, I think the next day I was in there smiling on a new ID card. And we didn't. Did we put it?
Yeah, there's an illustration.
We got an illustration where we go back. We got all my old ones, but it's crazy because when I first went to prison, which was in '99, as I've been convicted, I was smiling on my first ID, and I was smiling because I was like, I'm gonna beat this on appeal. So I'm in there smiling, and then I see my ID card 18 years later, and
There's a point where you, Nigel, ask Earlonne this question, and you don't just ask him how long he's been in, you asked him, how many birthdays have you spent in prison?
Oh.
And I'm curious about what made you think of the question in that way.
I think trying to find different ways to make that amount of time tangible to people. So everyone can relate to a birthday. I mean, obviously we can all relate to years, but I think it's always nice to have some kind of marker that shows time. And asking about birthdays seemed like a good way to show how long it had actually been.
What did it feel like to hear that question, Earlonne?
I'm still trying to, my mind, I done wiped so much stuff out of my mind. I just went in prison the other day and dudes was like, bro, you don't even remember my name. I'm like, nah, I've expunged that information. I've added new information in since then. I remember you, I might just not remember your name. But I think you really have to think, I remember we interviewed a dude that said he had done so many seasons. In prison, and this is when I got out of prison. I had interviewed this guy, and he was like, and I was like, damn, seasons. Yeah. So you just think of it differently. So to answer your question, I would say it probably was just interesting, and it had me. I can tell you how many days, and then even though I should be able to tell you how many birthdays by the years, but I served a lot of my birthdays from 18 all the way through 23, from 27 all the way to 47 birthdays in prison.
How much do you think or worry about the people who are still there that you came to care about?
Me, daily. I mean, it's so outside of Ear Hustle, I deal with criminal justice work in the communities, so and people call me daily. I get probably 15 calls a day from different prisons around California.
It's crazy. His phone rings constantly.
So it's always something that's on my mind. And like I say, one of my biggest things, I think, is ending this California 3 strikes law, because 40,000 people in prison are affected by this in California prisons, that are just there serving time that shouldn't be there because they get these extra sentences, this blanket of mandatory sentencing, 25 years to life. And that's just what they say on the law. This dude's in there with 1,000 years to life based on the 3 strikes law. So I'm very connected. My heart is in it, and hopefully when we end this law, I can retire for about 5 years and just enjoy life without tripping on that part.
So this all started in some ways with this accidental letter, these 3 letters, I guess, that were sent to you, Nigel. Now I have to imagine you both get letters for people who love the podcast, who would like to be featured, who would like to have their stories told, who would like to be represented as human beings. You can't say yes to all of them, even when they have an important story to tell. So what is the process like? And what is it like to have to tell somebody, it's not that I don't care about you, but you're not going to make the show?
Yes, we get a ton of mail, actual mail, email. Let's see. I'm just very upfront with people. Sometimes I can tell them it's not an ear hustle story. We have a very particular kind of story we tell. So that makes it a little bit easier. I'll listen.
I'll say this. I love the feedback. I love to be able to tell a person like, bruh, it's not about your life story, bruh. You know, it's not everything. You know, we just going for one moment in your life. You know, and if you pitch that one moment and we talking, then we probably could do a story, you know. I think the one thing that I like about all this is that even when I was incarcerated to getting out, you know, when the letters I was getting, whether they were from judges, from teachers, professors, officers that really appreciated what we were doing, you know. And I don't know if all of them was like, hey, tell my story.
Yeah, you know, it doesn't happen as much as you would think. We get more people contacting us about that they love the podcast or what they like about it. You know, we do get some pitches, and to be honest, usually they're not very good. So they are usually tell my story, and that's not our mission, is to tell one person's story, you know, like that, to tell a biography. As Earlonne said, we're looking for small stories. But in San Quentin, when I'm in there, if someone says they have an idea, I sit down and I listen to them and I give them feedback. And if it's interesting, then we'll do it. But I don't feel burdened. To be honest, I don't feel burdened by that.
Before you go, I know that you two have coordinating tattoos, and I wonder if they mean precisely the same thing to both of you.
So, no, they don't. They don't. I mean, the tattoo itself might be, but mine is a little different from hers. See, I had a tattoo that was, she's trying to hear this answer too. Because you should see how her face just got for real. She's like, what do you mean? No, so my ear hustle tattoo cover up a gang tattoo. So I always say that, you know, one of them got me in prison and one of them got me out of prison. You know, so that's how I look at it.
Nice. Mine is, this is my first tattoo. Mine is embodiment of the commitment I have to Ear Hustle and to Earlonne and to what we created together. So it was the first time in my life I ever wanted to put something on my body to say, this is what I stand behind. And it's really standing behind.
And let me say this.
We did.
Mine, hers didn't hurt. Hers did not hurt. She got like one needle. She had one needle. I had 10 needles going in at one time. Oh, so
it's the only time. Talk about crying. This was the first time I saw Earlonne cry when he got his tattoo. He was such a baby. It was unbelievable.
Nobody is used to getting 10 needles. How long did it take? What was the session, like 4 hours?
Because you kept crying and stopping.
Yeah, they should have told me to.
He had the nerve to say it hurts more than childbirth.
Earlonne and Nigel, it has been such a delight to talk with both of you. Thanks so much for making the time.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Wow, I have been blown away by day 2 of Big Bang 2021. There have been so many impactful conversations and so much content here. And I know that our minds and our hearts are overwhelmed, but we hope that we can take this and turn it into action. And so I remind you of the challenge of what will you give up? And I also welcome you to join us tomorrow, Big Bang Day 3, Wednesday, and it will focus on the environment. And a special thanks to EarthX for helping present that content tomorrow. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this programming. tomorrow and the rest of the week.